The command was simple: get rid of her. But as the heavy-handed guards dragged the trembling waitress toward the alley door, a single, impossible name fell from her lips. A name buried a decade ago. The ruthless syndicate boss froze, his breath catching. Everything he knew was a lie. The subterranean VIP lounge of the Gilded Lily was a sanctuary for New York's most dangerous predators, a soundproofed fortress where millions of dollars changed hands over crystal tumblers of scotch. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cedar, imported cigars, and unspoken threats. At the undisputed center of this high-stakes ecosystem sat Roman Falco. He was the architect of the city's most formidable underground syndicate, a man whose tailored charcoal suits and icy, calculating demeanor masked a notoriously ruthless nature. Tonight, Roman was entertaining Victor Sullivan, a corrupt district attorney whose cooperation was necessary for Roman's latest port expansion project. Nora Hayes had never been meant to serve the corner booth. She was 24, exhausted, and only working the VIP shift because a co-worker had called in sick. Nora was trying to scrape together enough cash to cover a crippling mountain of medical debts left behind by her late guardian. She felt entirely out of place in her tailored black uniform, balancing a silver tray laden with a bottle of Macallan 25-year and 2 heavy crystal glasses. Her hands, calloused from double shifts, were shaking slightly as she approached the heavy mahogany table. She kept her eyes cast downward, acutely aware of the unspoken rule of the Gilded Lily. The servers were meant to be invisible. "I need the shipping manifests cleared by Tuesday, Victor," Roman was saying, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute authority. He didn't even look up as Nora approached. "Tuesday is pushing it, Roman," Sullivan whined, adjusting his silk tie with sweaty, nervous fingers. "The feds are sniffing around Pier 40. If I rush the paperwork, it raises red flags." "Then buy a bigger flag," Roman replied coldly. Nora stepped up to the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached out to place the fresh bottle between the two men. But as she did, Sullivan suddenly slammed his meaty fist onto the table to emphasize his next point. The sudden, violent vibration jolted the heavy silver tray in Nora's hands. The crystal glasses tipped, and the bottle of Macallan slipped. Time seemed to slow down. The amber liquid splashed directly across Victor Sullivan's lap, soaking his expensive trousers and pooling onto the imported Persian rug. The sound of the glass shattering against the table echoed through the suddenly dead-silent lounge. The ambient hum of conversation from the other booths evaporated. Sullivan leaped to his feet, his face turning a mottled, furious red. "You stupid, clumsy wretch!" he roared, wiping frantically at his ruined suit. He turned a venomous glare toward Roman. "Is this the kind of garbage you hire, Falco? I come down here to do you a favor, to risk my career for your ports, and your staff treats me like a public bathroom floor." Nora dropped to her knees, her hands trembling as she desperately tried to gather the broken shards of crystal. "I am so sorry, sir. Please, it was an accident. I'll pay for the cleaning, I promise," she stammered, her voice thick with panic. Roman finally looked at her. His eyes were a pale, striking grey, devoid of any warmth or empathy. He looked at Nora not as a human being, but as a minor, irritating logistical error that had just complicated a multi-million-dollar negotiation. He despised incompetence. More than that, he despised losing leverage, and right now, Sullivan was using this girl to gain the upper hand. "Get up," Roman commanded softly. Nora froze, the shards of glass digging into her palms. She slowly got to her feet, her breathing shallow. Roman didn't even address her directly. He merely raised 2 fingers in the air. From the shadows, his head of security, a hulking enforcer named Gideon, materialized instantly. "Sullivan, calm down. The suit will be replaced," Roman said smoothly, though his eyes remained locked on Nora. "As for the disruption, it won't happen again." Roman turned to Gideon. "Take her out back. Remove her. Make sure she understands the penalty for embarrassing me in my own house." The words were spoken with casual indifference, but the implication was brutally clear. In Roman Falco's world, remove her didn't mean firing someone. It meant the dark alley. It meant the trunk of a car. It meant disappearing. Panic seized Nora's chest in a vice grip. "No, please, Mr. Falco, it was a mistake," she begged as Gideon's massive, calloused hand clamped down on her bicep. The enforcer's grip was like iron, bruising her instantly as he began to drag her backward away from the table. Sullivan sneered, adjusting his jacket. "Make sure she doesn't find her way back to this zip code." Nora struggled, digging her heels into the thick carpet, but she was no match for the enforcer. She was being pulled toward the heavy, brass-studded doors that led to the alleyway. The air grew cold. She saw the indifferent faces of the other patrons, watching her impending demise as if it were mere theater. She was going to die over a spilled drink. In that moment of absolute, blinding terror, a memory flashed through Nora's mind. It was the face of the old man who had raised her in a quiet cabin upstate. On his deathbed, he had grabbed her hand, his breathing labored, and given her one final desperate instruction. "Nora, if you ever cross paths with the syndicate in the city, if you are ever cornered by the boss, give them my real name. It is your only shield." As Gideon pushed her against the heavy exit door, Nora squeezed her eyes shut, fighting for breath, and let the name slip from her lips in a hoarse, desperate whisper. Samuel Vane. Roman Falco was already pouring himself a fresh drink from a reserve bottle, tuning out Sullivan's grating complaints when the whisper drifted across the quiet room. It wasn't shouted. It was barely audible, carried over the ambient jazz music like a ghost on the wind. Samuel Vane. The crystal decanter in Roman's hand halted entirely. His knuckles turned white. For a second, the entire world seemed to stop spinning. That name had not been spoken aloud in his presence in 12 years. It was a name buried beneath ash, police reports, and a closed casket. Samuel Vane was the founding father of the syndicate, Roman's mentor, and the man who had taken a bullet for Roman before supposedly perishing in a warehouse explosion orchestrated by a rival cartel. "Stop," Roman said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a physical blade. Gideon, who had just pushed the heavy brass door open, froze with his hand still wrapped around Nora's arm. Roman slowly set the decanter down. He turned his head, his pale grey eyes locking onto the struggling waitress by the door. The casual indifference in his gaze had vanished, replaced by an intense, terrifying hyper-focus. He walked around the mahogany table, ignoring Sullivan entirely. "Hey, Roman, where are you going? We aren't finished negotiating the pier," Sullivan started to complain. "Shut up, Victor, or you won't leave this building," Roman snapped, his tone so violently cold that the politician snapped his mouth shut, sinking back into the leather booth in stunned silence. Roman crossed the room with predatory grace, stopping just inches from Nora. She was trembling violently, her chest heaving, a thin line of blood on her palm from where she had gripped the broken glass. Roman stared down at her, analyzing every feature of her pale, terrified face. "What did you just say?" Roman demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, serrated whisper. Nora swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. She was terrified, but the old man had promised her this name would save her. "Samuel," she choked out. "Samuel Vane." Roman grabbed her chin, his fingers digging into her jaw, forcing her to look him in the eye. "Who told you that name? If you lie to me, the alley will be the least of your worries." "He did," Nora gasped, her hands coming up to grip his wrist, trying to ease the pressure. "He raised me. He told me if I was ever in trouble, if Roman Falco ever ordered me dead, that I was to say his name." Roman's mind raced, colliding with a dozen impossible realities. Samuel was dead. Roman had identified the watch recovered from the charred remains. He had inherited the empire based on Samuel's dying wishes. Yet this random waitress in a borrowed uniform possessed a piece of information so heavily guarded, so deeply buried in the syndicate's lore, that it couldn't be a coincidence. The specific phrasing, "if Roman Falco ever ordered me dead," was something only an insider would know to weaponize. Roman released her chin and stepped back, his chest tight. He looked at Gideon. "Bring her to my office, now." "Roman, what about our deal?" Sullivan shouted nervously from the table, realizing he had entirely lost control of the room. "The deal is dead," Roman said without looking back. "Get out of my club before I have Gideon throw you in the river." 10 minutes later, Nora found herself standing in the center of Roman's private office. The room was a fortress of mahogany and bulletproof glass, overlooking the glittering skyline of Manhattan. The heavy vault door locked behind her with a definitive click. Roman stood by the window, pouring 2 fingers of bourbon into a glass. He didn't offer her one. "Sit," he ordered. Nora collapsed into a plush leather chair, nursing her bleeding hand. Roman turned around, leaning against his massive desk, crossing his arms. The intimidation rolling off him was suffocating. "Samuel Vane died 12 years ago in a fire in Brooklyn. I was there. So you are going to explain to me, very carefully, how a dead man raised you." Nora took a shaky breath, trying to steady her racing heart. "He didn't die in Brooklyn. He lived in a cabin in the Adirondacks under the name Arthur Hayes. He took me in when I was 12. He passed away from lung cancer 3 months ago." Roman's eyes narrowed. "Arthur Hayes, a convenient alias. You expect me to believe my mentor faked his own death and spent a decade playing house in the woods? Why would he run?" "Because of the traitor," Nora said softly, her voice gaining a fraction of strength as she remembered the old man's final days. Roman stiffened. "Excuse me." "He didn't run from the rival cartels," Nora explained, reaching carefully into the pocket of her apron. Roman tensed, but she slowly pulled out a small, folded piece of thick parchment. "He ran because the explosion wasn't an attack from an enemy. It was an assassination attempt from inside his own circle. Someone he trusted rigged the warehouse." Roman stared at her, a profound silence settling over the office. For years there had been whispers in the dark corners of his empire. Inconsistencies in the books, ambushes that were too perfectly timed. He had hunted ghosts for a decade, trying to find out who had tipped off the hitmen the night Samuel burned. He said you were the only one he still trusted, but he was too badly burned, too weak to return and fight. Nora continued, holding the folded parchment out to him with a trembling hand. "Before he died, he gave me this. He said he kept records, a ledger of offshore accounts and hidden communications. He said the person who tried to kill him is still standing right beside you, Mr. Falco." Roman walked over and took the parchment from her hand. He unfolded it. It was a handwritten string of coordinates and a locker number, penned in a sharp, looping script that made Roman's blood run cold. It was Samuel's handwriting, undeniably. "Where is the ledger now?" Roman asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Hidden," Nora said, her survival instinct finally kicking in. She lifted her chin, meeting the Mafia Boss's terrifying gaze. And I'm the only one who knows how to retrieve it. So you can't kill me. Roman stared at the brave, foolish Waitress sitting in his chair. In the span of 20 minutes, she had gone from a disposable nuisance to the most valuable asset in his entire criminal empire. He folded the parchment, slipping it into his suit pocket, a dark, dangerous smile finally touching the corners of his mouth. "Well, Nora Hayes," Roman said softly, "it looks like you just got a promotion." The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Roman Falco's Tribeca penthouse, casting sharp, golden angles across the imported Italian marble floor. Nora Hayes had not slept a single wink. She sat perfectly still on the edge of a massive, silk-sheeted king bed, wearing a borrowed oversized cashmere sweater that smelled faintly of expensive cedar and rain. Only 24 hours ago, her biggest concern had been covering her rent and dodging collection calls. Now she was locked inside a $50 million fortress in the sky, under the strict protection of New York's most feared syndicate boss. The heavy oak door to the bedroom clicked open, breaking the suffocating silence. Roman stepped into the room. He had traded his formal charcoal suit for a tactical black turtleneck and dark trousers, looking less like a businessman and more like the lethal predator he truly was. On his left wrist, a heavy platinum Patek Philippe watch caught the morning light, a stark contrast to the dark leather shoulder holster strapped across his chest. "Get dressed," Roman commanded, his voice a low, gravelly hum that sent a shiver down Nora's spine. He tossed a sleek black garment bag onto the mattress beside her. "We are leaving in 10 minutes. We have a ledger to retrieve." Nora unzipped the bag with trembling fingers. Inside was a tailored black trench coat, dark denim, and a pair of discreet, flat leather boots. He was dressing her to run. "Where exactly are we going?" she asked, her voice raspy from exhaustion. "The coordinates your old man wrote down point to a private, highly secure subterranean vault beneath the Diamond District," Roman explained, his pale grey eyes analyzing her every movement. "Specifically, an independent depository at 585th Avenue. It is heavily guarded and entirely off the books. I know the place well. It is where billionaires hide things their wives and the IRS can never find. But to access Box 424, the system requires dual authentication, the physical key, which I assume you have, and a biometric voice print." Nora reached into her pocket, pulling out a heavy, intricately carved brass key she had worn on a chain around her neck since Samuel passed. "He made me memorize a phrase before he died. He said the vault would only open if I spoke it perfectly." Roman stepped closer, his imposing frame dominating the space. "Samuel trusted you with the keys to the kingdom. A waitress from upstate." The suspicion in his tone was evident, yet beneath it was a flickering spark of undeniable intrigue. "Let us see if you are worth the risk, Nora Hayes." The ride to Midtown Manhattan was conducted in absolute silence. They sat in the back of a heavily armored Mercedes Maybach S-Class, the tinted windows shielding them from the bustling city streets. Roman's second in command, a sharply dressed, unnervingly calm man named Harrison Cole, sat in the front passenger seat. Harrison had been Roman's closest confidant for 10 years, the only man in the syndicate who held enough authority to speak out of turn. "Perimeter is clear, boss," Harrison reported over his shoulder as the Maybach descended into the dimly lit, private parking garage beneath the Diamond District. "Gideon has men stationed at the north and south exits. We have a 10-minute window before the vault manager gets suspicious." Roman nodded tightly. He stepped out of the vehicle, immediately reaching back to pull Nora out. his large, warm hand wrapped firmly around hers, entirely engulfing it. The touch was strictly professional, yet an electric jolt snapped between them, causing Nora's breath to hitch. She looked up into his striking grey eyes, finding them momentarily fixed on her lips, before he sharply turned his attention to the steel security doors ahead. They navigated a labyrinth of sterile, white-tiled corridors, bypassing 2 armed security checkpoints, using Roman's immense wealth and terrifying reputation as an all-access pass. Finally, they stood before a massive titanium door labeled Vault 424. "The key," Roman instructed, stepping back to give her space. Nora's hands shook as she slid the heavy brass key into the mechanical slot. The machinery whirred to life, a digital screen illuminating in the center of the metal. Voice authentication required. The screen flashed in harsh green text. Nora leaned close to the microphone. She closed her eyes, channeling the memory of the kind old man who had saved her from the foster system. "The shadows only hide those who fear the light," she whispered clearly. A heavy metallic clunk echoed through the corridor. The titanium door hissed, releasing a pressurized seal, and slowly swung open. Inside the narrow safety deposit box lay a single, worn, leather-bound journal. The ledger, the key to dismantling a decade of betrayal. Roman reached in and grabbed the book. He flipped open the first page, his eyes scanning the dense, handwritten columns of offshore account numbers, shell companies, and syndicate payoffs. Suddenly, his posture went completely rigid. The color drained from his normally stoic face. "Roman?" Nora asked softly, sensing the sudden shift in the air. "What is it?" Before Roman could answer, the deafening echo of suppressed gunfire shattered the silence of the corridor. Sparks rained down from the ceiling as the fluorescent lights above them exploded. Roman reacted on pure instinct. He grabbed Nora by the waist, tackling her to the cold tile floor, just as a volley of bullets tore through the space where they had been standing milliseconds prior. "They knew we were coming," Roman snarled, drawing a sleek, matte black Glock 19 from his holster. He pulled Nora tightly against his chest, shielding her body with his own. "Who?" Nora screamed over the deafening echoes of the shootout, her face pressed against his tactical sweater. Roman looked down at her, his pale eyes burning with a terrifying, absolute rage. "The only person who knew I was bringing you here today. The man whose name is on the first page of this ledger." He looked down the corridor, aiming his weapon into the smoke. Standing at the end of the hallway, holding a smoking submachine gun, was his second-in-command, Harrison Cole. The narrow corridor beneath Fifth Avenue had transformed into a suffocating kill zone. Concrete dust choked the air as Harrison Cole's men laid down suppressive fire, shredding the titanium paneling of the vault room. Roman was a phantom in the smoke. With lethal precision, he returned fire, dropping 2 of Harrison's masked mercenaries before dragging Nora toward a heavily reinforced emergency maintenance shaft he knew ran parallel to the vault grid. "Move! Do not look back!" Roman roared over the gunfire, shoving Nora into the dark, narrow tunnel. They scrambled through the claustrophobic darkness, the sound of boots and shouting echoing behind them. Roman's knowledge of the city's subterranean infrastructure was flawless. Within 15 minutes, they breached a grated exit that dumped them into a deserted alleyway 3 blocks south of the Diamond District. The cold autumn rain was pouring down, washing away the dust of the gunfight. Breathing heavily, Roman leaned against the brick wall, his hand pressed tightly against his left side. Blood was seeping through his black turtleneck, blending seamlessly with the dark fabric. "You are shot!" Nora gasped, her hands hovering over his waist, panic lacing her voice. "It is a graze." "It missed the organs," Roman gritted out, his jaw clenched tight. He waved down a passing, unmarked black Lincoln Navigator, a ghost car he kept on standby for absolute emergencies. He shoved the driver aside with a quick command, taking the wheel himself. "Get in." They drove erratically through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, finally pulling into an abandoned, rusted shipyard in Red Hook, Brooklyn. Roman led her into a dilapidated shipping container that, once the steel doors were shut, revealed a high-tech, fully stocked tactical safe house. It was a secret contingency plan only he knew existed. Roman collapsed onto a leather cot in the center of the room, the adrenaline finally wearing off. He tossed the leather-bound ledger onto a steel table. "Patch me up," he commanded, gesturing to a stainless steel medical kit mounted on the wall. Nora didn't hesitate. She grabbed the kit, her hands miraculously steady as she cut away the ruined fabric of his sweater. The bullet had taken a vicious, bloody slice out of his obliques. As she cleaned the wound with industrial antiseptic, Roman didn't even flinch. He just watched her. He watched the fierce concentration in her eyes, the way she bit her lower lip, the complete absence of the terrified waitress from the VIP lounge. She was adapting to his violent world with terrifying speed. "Why Harrison?" Nora asked softly, breaking the heavy silence as she taped a thick gauze pad over the wound. Roman leaned forward, his bare chest inches from her face. The scent of gunpowder and expensive bourbon radiated off him. Because Harrison controlled the syndicate's offshore finances, 10 years ago, Samuel realized millions were being siphoned into a private account in the Cayman Islands. He confronted Harrison. Harrison rigged the warehouse to explode to cover his tracks. I was entirely blind. I mourned my mentor, and I let the man who killed him stand by my right hand for a decade. Nora finished the bandage, but she didn't step back. The proximity between them was intoxicating, pulling the oxygen from the tiny steel room. But Samuel survived, and he left you the weapon to destroy him. Roman reached up, his rough fingers brushing a damp strand of hair behind Nora's ear. It was the first genuinely tender movement she had ever seen him make. "You are the weapon, Nora. Without you, I would have handed my empire over to a snake. You saved my life tonight." The tension snapped. Roman pulled her forward, crashing his lips against hers with a desperate, consuming hunger. Nora gasped against his mouth, her hands tangling in his dark hair as he pulled her onto his lap. It was a kiss fueled by the intoxicating high of survival, a clash of two worlds colliding in the dark. Roman's hands mapped the curve of her spine, possessing her entirely, claiming her in a way that left no room for doubt. She was his now. Suddenly, a heavy metallic thud echoed from the outside of the shipping container. Roman broke the kiss instantly, his romantic haze evaporating into cold, calculated violence. He grabbed the Glock from the cot, racking the slide. "Harrison tracked the Lincoln's GPS," he whispered, his eyes turning to chips of ice. "Stay behind me." The steel doors of the safe house were blown wide open, tearing off their hinges. Rain and wind whipped into the room. Harrison Cole stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 heavily armed enforcers. Harrison looked arrogant, a triumphant smirk twisting his face. "It is over, Roman," Harrison shouted over the storm. "Hand over the ledger and the girl. I will make your death quick. You were always too emotional to run this city anyway." Roman stood in the center of the room, absolutely unfazed by the guns pointed at his chest. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black detonator switch. Harrison's smirk vanished. You think I built a safe house without rigging the perimeter with C4? Roman asked, his voice a chilling, deadpan calm. You forgot who taught me how to play this game, Harrison. Samuel Vane sends his regards. Roman pressed the button. A localized, deafening explosion ripped through the shipyard outside. The shockwave knocked Harrison and his men off their feet in a concussive blast of fire and shrapnel. Before the smoke could even clear, Roman moved. He stepped into the doorway and fired 3 precise, calculated shots. The enforcers dropped instantly. Harrison, bleeding and coughing on the wet concrete, looked up just in time to see the barrel of Roman's Glock point directly at his forehead. "Roman, wait," Harrison begged, raising a trembling, bloodied hand. "You ordered the waitress removed," Roman said coldly. "Big mistake." He pulled the trigger. The silence that followed was absolute, save for the patter of the autumn rain. Roman holstered his weapon and turned back to the safe house. Nora was standing by the steel table, her hand resting firmly on the leather ledger. She wasn't trembling anymore. She looked out at the carnage, then looked at the ruthless Mafia Boss who had just burned his own world down to protect her. Roman walked over to her, his pale eyes softening just a fraction as he looked down at the woman who had brought his mentor's ghost back to life. He extended his blood-stained hand. "Come on," Roman said softly. "We have an empire to rebuild." Nora took his hand, stepping out of the shadows and into the storm. Thank you for listening to this intense, high-stakes mafia romance. If you want to find out who the traitor in Roman's inner circle really is, and watch the undeniable tension between the ruthless boss and the brave waitress unfold, make sure to hit that like button. Share this story with your friends who love thrilling mafia dramas, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content. Let us know your favorite twists in the comments below.